exactly. Do you have an email address if you want me to send it to them?
That'd be great.
It would appear to be very long. But
Very wrong?
very long.
Long. Well, I talk brief, so.
I had forgotten. Steve gonna come. Who was the interview?
Oh, that's why.
Something must have come up.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe he'll still catch us at the end and be able to interview you. Yeah, I haven't heard back. Okay. Well, good evening and welcome to Roundabout Books. My name is Julie. I'm the events manager here at the store. We would like to acknowledge the land on which we live, work, and play, currently known as Bend, Oregon, is the original homelands of the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs, who ceded this land in the Treaty of 1855 while retaining regular and customary hunting, fishing, and gathering rights. The Warm Springs, Wasco, and Northern Paiute people have inhabited this area since time immemorial and are the original stewards of this land. We invite all guests and residents of Bend to honor and care for this land and acknowledge the full history of this area. How many of you are attending an event at Roundabout Books for the first time? Excellent. So, this is one of the reasons why we love our authors. They would not be here without you, so thank you for your support of our bookstore. Some of you saw that we had implemented a ticketing system. You can either buy a $5 general admission on our Eventbrite or in the store, or purchase the book. We would like you to encourage you to purchase the book because it not only helps us, but it helps the authors, especially those who have self-published and have gone through the painstaking process of adding all of those pictures into a book. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. And then some events that are upcoming in case you're interested. This Thursday, we are talking with author M. Jackson about the secret life of glaciers. Ooh. So she is a researcher that has gone and studied people who live around the glaciers in Iceland and what it means for climate change. So that one's going to be really interesting.
We should go to that. We just went to Iceland.
Oh wow, that's very
I
cool.
just went to that.
Yeah.
Like a year ago, yeah.
On the 21st, we have the editor of Oregon Home Magazine who is going to talk about her book, Find Yourself at Home, which is kind of a DIY approach to a conscious household. And then at the end of the month, we have banned book trivia because October 1st starts Banned Book Week, which celebrates any time a book has been banned or challenged by a school board, a school district, or a library. So we're going to have a quiz basically about those books, and it's going to be
Do you
fun.
have an email?
Not celebrating this year.
No, we're not celebrating banned books. We're highlighting them. Sorry. We are highlighting them to remind you why you must read books and not let them be banned and challenged. Yes. So yes, check out roundaboutbookshop.com for everything, including book clubs, in case you're interested.
Okay.
So how many of you already know Sally Bourrie?
Well,
Then I'm going to read a little bit of your bio. Okay. If everybody knows you, I don't want to go through the whole thing, but Sally has been a writer for more than 30 years. Sometimes it's paid well enough to put a roof over her head, and sometimes it's been only vital, mental, and emotional sustenance. As a freelance writer, she pitched and sold more than 2,000 features, articles, white papers, advertorials, book and web content on topics ranging from business and technology to the arts and gardening. The little video you did with Central Oregon Daily News, I really loved how they highlighted how you got involved with this, which I'm sure you're going to talk about. So if you have not seen that, you should go check it out. They did a wonderful feature of you for these events. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sally, and she's going to introduce the rest of these lovely people joining us for Oregon Loves New York.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody for coming. The first thing that I want to really tell you all is that Oregon Loves New York is your story. This is an Oregon story. It's about the flight for freedom when 1,000 Oregonians went to New York 3 weeks after 9/11. Many other places wanted to do it. Many other places contacted the members of the organizing committee. No other community was ever able to do what Oregonians did. And I wrote the book because I was there. At the time I was a freelance writer and I was covering it talking
hearing her okay? Cause I do have a microphone just in
Oh,
case.
okay, let me know if you want.
You should hide.
Yeah,
Use it.
you might want to, it'll pick
Okay.
up good on the video too.
Hello, can you hear me better?
No, it's not.
Oh, well, that would help.
Yeah, it should be up.
Yeah,
Is it on?
Oh, no.
Yes.
somebody keeps turning me down, try it now. Yeah, talk now.
Hello?
Hey.
There we go.
There you go, a little bit better. Sorry, just wanted to make sure.
Um, anyway, I was there and I saw the difference that people made there. I saw what it meant to be there for another person without judgment and heal them. And the people that you see here are all people who are from Bend at the time, and they're all Oregon heroes. And many times in history, we don't hear about quote-unquote everyday people. I don't believe there's an everyday person. I think everybody is special in some way. But one of the main things that I wanted to do with this book is document the courage and compassion of all these people. And the reason that they're here is because they're in the book, and I knew about them. And they were willing to come and share their experiences with you. What I'm gonna do right now is give you an overview of the Flight for Freedom, and then people here are gonna give you their memories of it. First, Joanne Dewey, and Joanne brought us a whiteboard over there with things that I've never even seen from the trip. So I highly recommend that you take some time to take a look at that before you go. This is Carrie Rossi, and she went with her 6-year-old daughter and husband at the time. This is Martin Fisher, who is Natalie, like all roads go to Natalie. Hello.
So a very dear friend.
Oh, good, thank you for coming, thanks to everybody. What I want to say about this as well is that, before I go into the nuts and bolts and logistical stuff, is that this is a story we need right now more than ever. This was a time when our country came together. The people here, I don't know what their politics are, nobody cared what your politics were. Nobody cared about your race or your religion. You got on the plane and you went, and when you got to New York, you didn't care who needed you, you were there for that person. And it's a really wonderful reminder of who we can be at our best. And I just really, at the risk of being sort of sickeningly sweet, what these people did was incredibly courageous and incredibly compassionate. And they're here, you know, just sitting here, minding their own business, but I just want you to know that what they did was a very big deal. I wanted to, as I said, I wanted to write this, to document this as an important historical event. The Library of Congress agreed and selected Oregon Loves New York for the Library of Congress collection. So your stories are going to be preserved forever. And I don't think, it's funny, sometimes I need to give people a 9/11 summary. I don't think I need to give you a 9/11 summary. You know what happened there. It's very interesting that young people often don't know about that. And that's part of the reason that my book is so thick, because there's also just some basic 9/11 history in there to help people be able to put this in context. What I do want to say about that is that, you know, it was 4 commercial aircraft that were used as missiles, and they flew into the Pentagon, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, and we don't know the destination of the other one because, as you know, the passengers fought the terrorists, and it went down to Pennsylvania. The outcome of that was that the country was really paralyzed, and commercial airliners had become weapons. Well, people did not want to get into the air. Not only the airline industry, but everything had been kind of shut down and people were in shock. And the other thing is, people were not going to travel, but the last place they were going to travel was New York City, because there was fear that there would be another attack. It was seen as the most dangerous place possibly in the world. So I set the stage because, again, what the three people you see here did was something that people were doing, and it's huge. So here's kind of the genesis of the trip, which is truly remarkable. On September 19th, a woman in Portland named Lowen DeZono had an idea. What about doing a caravan to New York City to show people not to be afraid? Well, her husband, Sho, who was the head of the Portland Chamber of Commerce and owned a chain of travel agencies, and was the kind of guy that if he thought there was a good idea out there, he'd do it, move heaven and earth to make it happen. By September 26th, a program that was a flight was announced. And so that was in a week. In a week, Sho said they'd done the work of what would usually take 6 months. So it's quite remarkable. And Sho had assembled leaders from across the state, top people who were able to handle a lot of different logistical things. And again, egos went away. Everybody helped everybody, even these top leaders, which we know we see a lot of times now. People's egos get in the way of actually getting anything done. And that was completely the opposite case here. And it was Republicans and Democrats, all colors, all religions, and rural, urban. What happened when they announced the trip, they had one activity, but the idea was not an activity. The idea was to show you're not afraid. So when people signed up for this trip, it wasn't like they thought they were going on a tour or something. It was just, I want to do something, and they signed up. They had hoped that they would get 150 brave people to go on this trip. Okay, that was September 26th. October 1st, they had to stop taking reservations at 1,000. And that, it was one in every 3,000 Oregonians who went on this trip. And the reason that the trip, the first people were leaving October 6th. The reason they had to cut it off on October 1st is because this is the pre-internet days. So you had to call or fax or walk in, and they would write down the name of the person and their phone number. And it's actually pretty funny. People would send in these faxes with their credit card numbers, all kinds of stuff, and total naivete maybe, or but that's how that worked at the time. Now the Flight for Freedom took place October 6th to the 8th, 2001. And you're going to hear about a lot of different things people did. That only took place basically in 3 days. In fact, even less, because the travel from the West Coast to the East Coast with the time change takes up a huge amount of time. The other thing to know about this was not only was it a brave thing to do on October 6th, October 7th was the day that the United States started bombing Afghanistan. And the Freedom Fliers were there. And security escalated tremendously. Many of the events that had been scheduled, the people that were having them, like they went to Good Morning America, they had a dinner for 700 in Chinatown. They've got questions from the people, like Good Morning America called and said, we don't want you here on the outside because that can be dangerous. And they said, well, we came here to show people not to be afraid. We're going to be there. And they did. And again, I know I'm so much a broken record, but I just want you to know, the leaders said that, but these people were the ones whose bodies were there. The trip cost $379 round trip from Oregon to New York, and it included 2 nights at the Waldorf-Astoria hotel. And at that time, nobody was flying. So Show negotiated a great deal with them and filled their planes. And they had asked the Hilton if they could get a hotel maybe on Times Square. And they said, well, the Waldorf's empty, why don't we just give you that? And so just for the price of the room tax, people got to stay there. So it was, and the idea was to make it possible for anybody, as many people as possible, to participate. So there were bartenders and taxi drivers and millionaires and the whole gamut of people came on this trip. The other thing about that is that everyone was a volunteer. Nobody made any money off this. The DeZonos with their travel agency didn't make anything. Airlines didn't make anything. Hotels didn't make anything. Nobody connected with it made any money. So it was quite a selfless, pure effort that it's hard to imagine today that the level of selflessness without any sort of self-interest, but that's what it was like. Freedom Fliers flew to New York on 62 flights through 12 airports, which gave employment to people who would not have had that employment. And that's the same with the people at the Waldorf. So it was very, very important to people, the day's work that they got from this trip. All the organizers were volunteers. Portland Mayor Vera Katz, who was a former New Yorker, led the group. And just to be clear, the Flight for Freedom wasn't a tour. It was people who wanted to do something. Now, at the time, Mayor Giuliani, when he was a hero, had said, yeah, that's right. Had said New York's open for business, come on back. And so some people thought, well, that's what I can do. I'll go there and spend some money. But it wasn't like there was necessarily a massive agenda. Although Martin, you had a pretty good reason for going, if I remember right, to really tell Al-Qaeda what you thought of them, I think.
It involved a finger.
By the time that the Oregonians got there, so the trip was announced the 26th, by the time they got there, events had been organized. Many former New Yorkers were in the leadership group and they understood how New York worked. They had contacts. So the Oregonians marched in the Columbus Day Parade. Again, another place they almost didn't hold the parade. Many people dropped out. 700 of the Oregonians were in the parade. They rang the bell at the New York Stock Exchange the day after we started bombing Afghanistan, and that was a very, very dangerous time to be there. Held a memorial service at Union Square, which is the largest public space, the last public space before going further downtown into the cordoned off area. And Union Square had become sort of a shrine. And people brought candles, just like you see now when there's been a loss. People brought candles, people brought all kinds of things. And you also saw pretty much throughout the city the missing flyers, where you'd see, have you seen this person? Even 3 weeks later, they were all over. Mayor Katz spoke at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine's Blessing of the Animals. They appeared on Good Morning America and had the banquet for 700 in Chinatown. And at the time, I don't know if any of you remember David Wu, but he was the only Chinese American member of Congress. And so they got sponsors and really helped the businesses down in Chinatown that had not had business. But this is what's most meaningful to me, and I would not have known this had I not been there. and I saw it again and again and again. You know, these shirts are not exactly the most subtle things anybody has ever worn. And I don't know that anybody expected this. New York was quiet, and people would come up to us and thank us for coming. Often their 9/11 stories would come telling out, and they might start crying, they might start saying, I need a hug. I never heard of any Oregonian who wasn't there for those people. And I believe that the Oregonians made a difference in hundreds of lives while they were there. And it really shows, you'll find many of the stories in the book, because I interviewed about 100 people and I was amazed. Everybody has those kinds of stories. And nobody was embarrassed, they just stepped into it, and I don't think anybody expected that that's what they'd be called on to do when they were there. I think that's all I need to tell you right now, and I'll let Joanne talk now.
Well, this was a program that Dave and I gave to Rotary immediately after we got home. And lo and behold, I found the notes. So I'm gonna read those notes because that was how it was when we got home, rather than 22 years later and how I might feel about it. This flight was the inspiration of Show and Loan DeZone. And as Sally said, he was head of the Portland Chamber. They had hoped on about 200 people, but it roller coastered in the end to about 1,000 went, and they left home about 300. The dignitaries that were with us were Vera Katz, John McGowan, David Wu, Jerry Frank, and we all kind of know Jerry. We had read about the flight for freedom in the Oregonian. On a Sunday, September 30th, we got on the webpage, left a message, and by Monday we had a call from the volunteers saying a travel agent would call back and make the final arrangements. We left October 5th, Friday morning, flight to San Francisco. At the airport, Carrie Novak, she was the manager of the airport at that time, had heard about the trip and left some flag pins for us to give out. There were about 7 of us on that flight. We got to San Francisco, and from San Francisco to New York, had about 15 of us total. There were a total of 62 different planes taking us to the Big Apple. We arrived in New York, JFK. We all stayed at the Waldorf-Astoria. We received our Oregon Loves New York pins. Nobody, did you guys have the pins? Yeah, I couldn't find mine. That pin was our key to New York. On Saturday, we took a Gray Line bus tour and got off near Soho and walked about 10 blocks to Ground Zero. That was as close as you could get in a car or bus. And as Sally said, the Chinese were really happy to see us, and one of the reasons was nobody could get down there. They had to kind of walk. Okay, let's see. It was blowing and raining. The police and firemen were wearing masks and raincoats. We stood about a block and a half from the devastation. You could smell the concrete, smoke, and the dust was in the air. The building we stood beside were full of dust, even the inside, this jewelry store. The dust hung on the walls and inside the buildings. The grates were full of dust from concrete, and there were notes and pictures on all the walls for the people that were looking for their friends and family that were lost. As we stood there with tears in our hearts, people started thanking us for coming. They would pass us by when it would hit them what the pin meant, and they would come back to shake our hands. Most New Yorkers had heard we were coming, and they opened their hearts to us. The reason I had come to New York was to tell New Yorkers this didn't just happen to you. It happened to all of us, and we were here for you. My other message was to the terrorists, and that was, I am not afraid, and I will live my life as I wish. I guess that was the end. There's a couple other, Dave's notes, all right. Dave's not here with us, but his notes were here, and there were a couple things that he had mentioned that I wanted to mention. We stopped at Starbucks and met a bunch of Red Cross volunteers and 3 forest workers from Portland and Bend. All of the cocktails and parties were paid by corporations. Intel, Nike, Columbia, American Express. It was all taken care of. We never put out any money for anything. After the dim sum meal, we were walking and I wanted to, these were selling for, I don't know, $5 or $10. Everybody sold. So we went into this store and there were 2 Chinese ladies there. And the one Chinese lady went over to the other lady and talked in Chinese. And what she said to the lady was, would you please give her my American flag pin and thank you for being here. I mean, she couldn't even speak English, but they really cared. One police officer said, come back often because we made New York friendlier. Mark Taylor, who was a fireman from Bend, and he has retired. I tried to get a hold of him. He was the chief division officer, fireman here in Bend, Oregon, and I tried to reach out to him because David asked him to come to the Rotary meeting, and he had some beautiful pictures of Ground Zero. There was a couple things that you said. What were they?
She said a lot.
Yeah, well, anyway, it was, oh, I know what I wanted to say. Shortly after that, we had already signed up for a trip to Cuba with our church. And so 2 weeks later, we no sooner got home from New York, we went on to Cuba. And I have to say, those trips were the most heartwarming, devastating trips, whatever, made the biggest impression because it really was a reality of what America is and how much it really means to us, and we should be thankful we live here. Because after Cuba, we didn't stay in the hot Astoria. We stayed on 2 mattresses. Anyway, those 2 events, and I probably have forgotten something else, but that's,
We're here for a while.
okay. Okay.
I'm just gonna add one little thing to what Joanne said about going down to Chinatown. They really took care of us. They chartered buses, double-decker buses, for us to go down there. So we were very, very much taken care of from the very beginning to the time that we left.
Before you get it to him, I know what I wanted to say. You see this little thing here? This is a Swarovski pin, and he was selling them at Macy's and Fifth Avenue for like $35, and all the money was to go to the firefighters.
Okay. I almost sort of, before I forget, I think we stood in front of the same jewelry store.
Oh, really?
Because I got a photo in here of that jewelry store display window, and it looks like and I said this a bunch of, I think, like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie, where it's so dusty and so empty that nobody's been here for 100 years. I'm positive it's the same because it's right as you were facing, the pile. Wow. So, I think we stumbled across this kind of the same way. I'm pretty sure I saw this on the Oregonians website, and know, it wasn't the kind of thing we would usually do. We were not the people who would say, what do you want to do next weekend? I know, let's fly to New York. That, you know, but I saw this story and it sounded super intriguing, and of course, most importantly for us at the time especially, really affordable. And you know, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Carrie, but I have this recollection that I saw this story, and then I had gone downstairs, and I think we were outside maybe, and I said, hey, I saw the story about this thing, and I sort of explained it, and I frankly expected her to be smarter than me and say, yeah, no. But she didn't. It was like, that sounds like something we should check into. And then I'm like, oh no, what have I got myself into? So, okay, and so we checked it out, and the same way, called them and sent a fax or something, and next thing you know, we're flying to New York. And I was really confident that nobody was going to do this, right? Because it was so insane. But I also felt like if there was a safe time to fly, it was then. Like, I understood that people were scared, but this was the safest time you could ever go because everybody was on super high alert. And so, but you know, still, I was pretty sure no one was going to go. So we sign up. We get to the airport at Redmond, and there are other people. You were probably on our flight. And that's the first inkling I got. Like, in this little area, there are other people doing this. How'd they find out? And then we got to, I think, San Francisco, and there were a bunch more people. And like, the plane was full of them. And then we got to New York, and there was a whole hotel full of people. And it kept escalating, like, oh my gosh, this is really something. We got there, and our first experience was after we checked into the hotel, and there's some very thankful people there. We were hungry, right? Because I think we get there like late, and so they sent us down the street to an Italian restaurant, and we were, I think, the only people in there. And the staff was just beside themselves if anybody had shown up. And we had the pins. We didn't have the shirts yet. We had the pins up. And they started asking, what is this? Why are you here? And we would tell them, and they started talking about their experience. Like, just all of a sudden, oh, boom. And that started making it real. Like, these are people who didn't just watch this on CNN that day. And that got to be kind of weird, just to hear that. We didn't get to stay until Monday. We flew home on Sunday. We did. I thought we stayed 2 days. We did so many things on Saturday I swear we saw the entire city in a day, and attended a play. It was insane. And then when we flew home, that was the day they had started bombing Afghanistan, and we were in the airport waiting for this ridiculously long security check, you know, because again, everything is extra heightened now. And in comes the National Guard, you know, 20, 30 people. And the thing that struck me is, if you ever watch soldiers come and go, their rifles are usually strapped to their back. They're on their shoulders, behind their back. Not these guys. They all had them, you know, up forward, ready to go. It was really unsettling. that was one of the things that really jumped out at me, that whole experience. One of the other real memorable parts, though, was, at least for me, going to see Les Miserables. Now I've probably seen it like 6 or 7 times. It's my favorite play of all time. I'm seeing it again in November. I basically know it by heart. Okay. And so, I know the story. I know the words. I can sing along. And so we go there, and we're in a Broadway theater, which I thought was super cool. They're really small. They're shockingly small. And so we're in this theater, and they're coming along. And if you are familiar at all with the play or the songs in it, there is movements at the end where the story is all about, after this horrible experience with the French Revolution and all these people fighting for freedom die, and it's all just very sad. But the end is this sort of, nonetheless, who can be not afraid and join us as we sort of search for freedom. And I was like, dang, I've heard this 100 times. And that day, it was just profoundly different. It was just, it killed me. That was really impressive. And then the other experience was, I think, the same as everybody else had, is standing at the pile where it's, there was this horrible smell, this acrid, burnt metal and plastic, dust everywhere. And it was this weird combination of silence and noise, because, 2 blocks over, and they have these terrible photos. They had a bad camera, but you can kind of see them. We're not that far away. And it's the sound of, these giant excavators digging through it. But it was also silent. And, at every corner are multiple National Guards and police. But then standing in front of us, there was these people who I had a photo, and they were standing there, just sort of sobbing. Like, these aren't just the people who I talked to in the restaurant. They're standing here looking at where their person is no more. And that really stuck. That was hard. And super inspiring in the sense that they still thanked us for coming. Like, you've got better things to wear. No, they still thanked us for coming. Because of our shirts, the magic shirts. It was really inspiring, and it's weird because I've never really talked about this with anybody. It was just this thing we did, and I thought it probably helped inspire other people. I'm sure it momentarily made some people happy, but then we had to get back to work, and New York's a big city. I'm sure they had other things going on, and so reading this was really eye-opening to me, because I just never envisioned my place in this giant story. So it's a really excellent book, and it provides. I learned things that I didn't know about. I was there, and I didn't know this happened. So yeah, it was very eye-opening to just see how being one person, or in our case 3 people, doing this seemingly inconsequential thing of just walking down the street made these huge impacts in people's lives. You didn't see that coming.
so that was pretty challenging for me. One of the things I do have to add is when we stepped on the plane, we didn't tell our families. So no one knew. No one knew that we went to New York. So that was interesting conversations when we got back. But so with our parents. So for me, again, being very right-brained and very visual, it's really hard to wrap my brain around and explain to people. You see so many photos and you look through and you watch the news, but unless you're there, it is hard to explain. Like when Martin says the smell, and even that photo doesn't even, like a movie set, like you watch so many war movies, it felt like you were in on a movie set and it didn't feel real, but it was real. That's what it was like. So, I said I was emotional today. The thing is kind of wild, but even recently, like now we went to Summit High School right over there, and they had a bomb scare yesterday. So they shut, I don't know if you guys know that, but they shut the whole school down. And canceled all the classes and all the so it's still kind of around and it's still kind of lingering over us. So cancel all the classes and all the after school sports. So that just kind of brought it kind of home and real. And then the other thing that I was telling Molly is that I heard, and I don't know if you guys heard, there were like two victims that still were identified after over 20 years that they the families had not identified the families. So to be over decades and still have people who they just found. So it's continuing on and on. And let's see, for me. Also, the play was very impactful. If you ever seen Les Miserables, that touched me more than any play. And since we had seen it before for several times, that was very impactful. But the thing that, again, like Molly talks to, is just coming up and people, strangers hugging you, crying, telling their stories, was what I felt that really touched me more than anything. So, that's pretty much, that's all I have to say. All right.
I just probably clapped on the mic and broke everybody's eardrum. Okay.
Yeah.
What I wanted to just say is, I just want to tell you a little bit about the book and what you'll find in the book. What you've heard right now are just teeny tiny tastes of what's captured in the book, because it really is kind of amazing that it was only 3 days and yet so much happened to so many people. There's a great story. Todd Davidson, who's the head today of Travel Oregon, marched in the parade. And to say that the Oregonians marched in the parade is sort of sets a high bar for what it was. They actually started, as somebody said, it was more of a ramble. And everybody just went kind of moseyed around and hugged everybody, because all the people on all the New Yorkers on the side were saying, Oregon! That's what they say. Come here. But the thing about what happened with him, and he said he has 2 travel stories that show what travel can do for a person. And in the Columbus Day Parade, there was a little tiny old lady who was holding people's hands and thanking them, the Oregonians' hands, as they walked by. And he was the last one in the line, and she just said, "Thank you for coming." And she threw her arms around him. And he said he stood there and he held her. And I asked him, how long was that? I'm thinking like maybe at the most a couple minutes, 20 minutes. The whole parade went by. And, I bring these up not to be maudlin or anything, but just to tell you, this is the kind of thing that this is one of the main things that's made this project be so important for me. This is a bucket list thing for me. And I had written a book for the people who participated in 2003, a little book. And thank God I did that because as the head of the Chamber of Commerce, Show DeZono could get me all the clippings that came out of the trip. There was a thing at that time called a clipping service. Every time the Flight for Freedom was mentioned, they would get a copy of it. So I got all these articles, although Joanne has some I still have never seen before over here. But today, 20 years later, with everything being digitized, it's amazing. Things don't exist anymore. I mean, even the Oregonian didn't have all the photographs that I had their articles, and I wanted to get the digital files. They didn't have all those digital files. So many things have been lost, and that's another reason I'm pleased that I wanted to, like I say, bucket list. I wanted to document this, and that's why this book exists. And I was lucky to have a lot of research that we hadn't had before, or that I wouldn't have been able to get now. I want to also add some people that really helped. Besides all the freedom flyers, I mean, every person is like what you see today. Every person, this was some sort of milestone in their life. Everybody wants to talk about it. Everybody, and that was probably the greatest joy. But Charlie Gibson, who was the host with Diane Sawyer of Good Morning America, the Freedom Flyers went there, stood outside, even though the Good Morning America said, "Don't do it, we don't want you to do it." And they said, "The heck with that, we're gonna be there." Charlie Gibson and Diane Sawyer came out, and everybody sang New York, New York. And Charlie Gibson helped me find the transcript of that visit. So I've got all that information that we wouldn't otherwise have, and I'm just very pleased that that's in there. At the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, sadly, everybody says that Vera Katz gave the greatest speech of her life. She talked about, she had just gone through battling cancer, and how that had taught her to give more of herself to other people, and the power of a hug. She had notes, and she threw the notes away. And apparently what the people said was that the place rocked. And there are 6,000 people who fit in that cathedral, so it was quite an amazing thing. But I was able to get, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. spoke that day, and they had recorded his speech, so I was able to include some of that in here, because it was the Feast of St. Francis of Assisi, and so it was about animals and ecology, and I wanted to give a flavor of what people at the service were hearing. And then the archivist gave me their photographs of the event, and those haven't ever been published. They've just been sitting in a room somewhere. And for me, it's 2 football fields long. They had a tarantula, camels, ant farm, horses. I mean, it's just an extraordinary thing, and that now is on my bucket list to go to. What I'm pleased that I have in the book is the photographs. The special guests were the Ground Zero dogs that year.
I was just gonna, told you were gonna say that, I can remember them going by the fences and all.
Yep, so they took them over there. those are kind of the couple of things that I'm very pleased that, like I said, I wanted to preserve history here, and I think I was able to get documentation of things that would have gotten lost. I guess the other thing is the leadership of the trip. Some of them got invited to go inside Ground Zero, and so I have photographs from inside where you can see the actual work being done. And like Martin said, and like Carrie said, it's kind of amazing because the people look like these little dinky things, and the equipment is absolutely enormous. So I'm very pleased that we have views that, I mean, I had not seen inside Ground Zero. It never really occurred to me to Google it or anything, but I'm really pleased that, and we have Vera Katz standing in the group standing in Ground Zero.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
When Billy, the fireman, I can't think of his last name, has died since then because of the environmental issues, he led us down there. I thought we were in Ground Zero at that point when Billy led our tour. Weren't we in Ground Zero, all of us? I mean, it's a, you know, a dusty blur and everything that's happening, but I thought that's where we were.
We have to do a new edition of this book because I've never heard of this before.
Yeah, because I really need to make me pee. So, you don't think about that logistically, but many of us did actually. It was quite a long presentation. So I went into a nearby store owned by a Middle Eastern fellow. I don't know how safe he felt, but anyway, it was his store, and he talked to me. I put out some cement steps. He's a really funny little, you know, employee hole in the wall bathroom, and which I was grateful for. And there was dust completely, but coming up the steps, he told me about the people that ran in there when it happened. And he said, I want to close the door to these people because I thought they were all, you know, not good, like crime or something. And he said their mouths were filled with dust. They were just totally freaked out because it had just happened, you know, the first hour of the second hour. And he still had his door open, and the place was full. So I assumed, you know, as I look back at all those years, that we were, because Billy took us down to Ground Zero.
I've never heard that before.
Oh.
Not ever. I do have Billy in the book. There's a little section about him because he was a huge hero.
I
And
haven't read that one part yet, but so much. You
Well-
know, you've done such a great job, but I haven't read that part, so I'll look for it.
Well, he's in. Was it Billy Quick? Am I thinking?
Yeah.
Billy Quick. Afterwards, I'd like to talk to you because
Yeah.
holy moly.
Well, we did talk on the phone tonight. Sorry, I didn't follow up better. My
Oh.
sister and I went, but yeah,
Oh, cool. Good.
you know how things happen.
Well, I will tell you that what I'm hoping to do as a next step is, what I will do is create a foundation, and I'd like to preserve the oral histories of everybody that went on this trip so that we can have them as a further historical record of this.
Well, if you think about, look at Lowen. Lowen actually went to my high school, but I didn't know what she's like 10 years old. She has just retired recently from working at the senior center for Japanese Americans and others in Southeast Portland. She's so humble, you'd never hear from her. You said that she really did come up with the idea that she would never touch it. You know, she's just that humble and quiet spoken. So that kind of thing, you know, people never have known until you look that.
Well, and when they had these meetings to organize the trip, she was the one that kept everybody organized. Like the conversations would kind of go off here and there, and she'd say, we're gonna be doing this, and I saw her notes and you could tell, totally organized person. What I wanted to just tell you a couple of other things. Oh, Governor Pataki spoke with me. He was the New York governor at the time. He spoke at the last reception, and he was incredibly busy, obviously, at that time. But coming to think that Oregonians was that much of a priority for him. And 3 years later at the GOP convention, he asked all the Oregonians to stand up and called out this activity. And it was, I'm gonna just read something that he said. He said, the symbolic commitment to be part of the recovery of New York from these horrible attacks meant a great deal to all New Yorkers and sent a very positive message to the entire nation. The Flight for Freedom demonstrated that people from 3,000 miles across the continent felt comfortable and safe in the streets, and that message got out in the rest of the country. So for the Oregonians, just to be walking down the street and being comfortable was huge, and there was a lot of news coverage of it, and so that was a very big contribution. I'm going to read one last thing, and then I'm going to tell you a great. This is the quotation that for me captures, at least for me, there are 1,000 people, 1,000 different things that capture the truth. But Jan Woodruff, who was director of marketing at Portland State University, wrote this. She said, the psychological barriers that separated Oregonian from New Yorker, us from them, human from human, disintegrated. Soon we were holding perfect strangers in our arms. In those moments, we shared tears, hurt, and fear, but we also shared hope. In those moments, we saw that our similarities eclipse our differences. We knew that human spirit could triumph over hatred, and we understood that compassion heals souls. And doesn't it sound like something we need today a lot? So I'm going to leave you with one last little thought. There's a lot of joy in this book. There's grief, of course. There's inspiration. There's also humor. There are some very, very funny things that people talk about, especially people. One guy had never been to New York, and he said, now I know why New Yorkers walk so fast, because they have these signs all over the place that say no standing. There's a woman, Barbara Shaw from Scio, which is near Philomath, and she lost her camera at LaGuardia. But one of her main goals had been to bring her family New York cannolis. So her kids said, you can get another camera. The cannolis are great. So that's really the presentation. I don't know if anybody has questions, anything that you'd like to say. You have these great people here.
I've got two questions. Because of the publicity that you got, did any other states follow?
Many other places, states, cities, contacted the organizers of the Flight for Freedom, and they got help, because the people who did the Flight for Freedom wanted more people to do what they'd done. Nobody else was able to pull it off. So I don't know what that says about the leadership. I think it says a lot about Oregonians. That's why this is an amazing, amazing thing.
The other question was about you. I was interested in what a 6-year-old's impression of the whole thing was, and maybe now that you're older.
So 28. I think what I thought a lot about since then is, why did you take your 6-year-old on this trip? And then also
Tell your
not
grandma
tell
you
our
were going.
Like, guys, okay.
You're doing pretty well now.
Yeah. And I mean, I have lots of memories. I don't have any of like the sad or impactful memories. I don't know if that was something that you all kind of kept from me, or they just kind of went over my head and I was focused on, doing all the fun things that we were doing. But I mean, I remember 9/11. I remember that morning, and thinking, Mom, why are you crying in a movie? Why are you watching this movie so early? Going to school. And I remember coming back to my first grade class, and having kids run up to me and say, were you there when the towers fell? And my response was some smart aleck comment like, if I hadn't been there, I would still be like coughing dust. So, I mean, I guess I took that away, that there was a lot of dust. And I knew it was sad, but I mean, I remember people coming up to us, and I thought that was cool. I remember drinking out of a water fountain, because you can do that in Oregon, and it tasted like hot garbage. And my parents were like, that's why we have water bottles. I hearing about too, like all of the things that we did, and seeing those pictures. I don't know how I made it through. Well, there's a photo of me at the end of the day, literally just collapsed in a ball, asleep on the floor. But yeah, I mean, it was just like, it seemed like just another trip, which was, it's weird to say that, but it was just a trip, and there were a lot of people there. Some people were happy, some people were sad. My question was, were there any other kids there, or was I the youngest person? What? Like,
You're the only kid that I've heard of. There was a 15-year-old, Stephanie Himshaw, who wrote a journal, but I have not heard of any other kids. And I do want to say, as much as, we're talking about people coming up and telling you their stories, in the book you'll see people looking pretty darn happy because everybody went there to spend money and, have a good time in New York and help New Yorkers. So that's kind of what Governor Pataki was saying, like to see people on the streets having a good time. That was an extremely large turning point for New York, that the Oregonians did this. It wasn't the amount of money, it was that visual of being out there.
I do think we didn't do, obviously, because we had a 6-year-old, do all the same activities that you may see that other people experience. We kind of had our own little journey with Natalie, and which was very special. So, but yeah, so that's why she probably thought she was at Disneyland.
Well, we are about out of time, so I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you for bringing all of these people together. I actually thought it was the movie The Siege, which came out in 1998, and it's about an FBI bombing at the Pentagon. And I was watching it, and I thought it was that movie. Like, I was 20, I was waiting for school to start at COCC, and I thought it was just somehow on the channel I had turned on.
Yeah, that's wild.
And it was, I've watched that movie since, and it is shockingly, like, it predicted it almost. Yeah, it's Annette Bening and somebody else. It's a great movie, but I can't watch it because it just is very close.
When we went back after 5 years, they had a reunion. And so, yeah, you went too? Yeah. We didn't get as cheap of accommodations at the Astoria for that one, but we did go back after 5 years. And it was a different city. They changed back kind of to New Yorkers. They weren't open, they weren't, so.
So we have books for sale right here. We do only have 2. If you would like a copy, we're happy to order it. And obviously, if you want anybody to sign these, that's what we're gonna kind of do. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Thank you very much.